The news site The Intercept has released an interactive tool that tracked over 600 ICE operations, and the project shows raids primarily conducted in New York. It is the culmination of work by the Immigrant Defense Project and Center for Constitutional Rights. And this comes as controversy grows around the separation of immigrant families. Many children remain separated from their parents as reunification efforts proceed. Ryan Devereaux is a reporter for The Intercept and has been following the ICE raids and reunification efforts, and he joins us now. Always good to see you, and thanks a lot for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
So tell us about this guy named Michael. You followed his story. What happened to him in April?
Yeah, so Michael is an assumed name, and we're using an assumed name here because Michael fears retaliation from ICE, which is the agency that arrested him in April. He was asleep in his apartment in New York City. He had actually a meeting with his immigration attorney that day. There was pounding on his door. He went to the door. There were three armed men and one woman in tactical vests there and a cameraman rolling. They wanted into the apartment. They were looking for a Russian. They entered the apartment. They were banging around. They were searching. The Russian wasn't there. They asked Michael for his identification. He produced his passport. He was trying to get his green card stabilized that day, and they said, "You're coming with us." Took him into detention where he remained for the next several months. Michael was what he later learned is called a collateral arrest, which is one of these arrests that ICE has been doing more frequently in New York City and around the country, where they encounter somebody looking for somebody else, in this case, this Russian individual, and finding that person, they grab whoever else is in the area. Michael happened to be one of those people. We're seeing a lot more of that under the Trump administration.
I was about to ask you, is Michael's story pretty much typical of what these raids look like?
Yeah, so about a year and a half or so ago, we started hearing murmurings that ICE deportation officers were under new orders to make these collateral arrests. They'd been limited in the past because the immigration system is backlogged. It's sort of a disaster, and so ICE was, under the Obama administration, limited in who it was supposed to be taking in. That changed when the Trump administration came in. Trump signed an executive order within his first week in office that basically tore up priorities from the Obama administration, basically making every undocumented immigrant in the United States, and 11 million people, sort of fair game equally. So when ICE encounters people in the course of its operations, even if it's going out looking for one specific person, now anybody that they encounter who's out of status can be taken in. They're fair game.
What is ICE Watch?
So ICE Watch is the new interactive that Immigrant Defense Project and CCR have put together that we got sort of early access to, which tracks what these operations have looked like in New York City. So it goes back several years, but its focus is trends that have picked up post-inauguration, post-Trump. So it looks at several different areas, collateral arrests being one, the use of force, surveillance, warrantless entry into homes, a number of different issues that have sort of come up again and again in reports that legal advocates, lawyers are hearing around New York City. Courthouse arrests and attempted arrests have been a big issue in New York City.
What about limitations for this project? Are there any?
Yeah, so this is not a comprehensive account of every single arrest or attempted arrest. This is just a snapshot. This is a tip of the iceberg. But what it does reveal is an agency that is going through a really historic moment, given that the Trump administration has changed the priorities for arrests. It's an agency that sees itself as unshackled, and we're seeing the way that's playing out in a lot of these operations, and in the cases like Michael, where people are picked up in instances where they would have otherwise been left alone.
Ryan, the Texas Tribune reported that the number of immigrants in shelters in Texas has actually increased in recent weeks, despite the government saying it has reunited hundreds of children with their families. What's the latest on that process? I know it's a lot of conflicting facts, stories, you name it.
Yes, you're absolutely right. This story, and I've been following this story closely since the beginning, it's one of the most dramatic national stories I've ever seen. It's been chaos from the very beginning. What you had here was the Trump administration basically instituting a policy of systematically separating parents from their children at the border, for illegal entry into the country. These are cases where in the past prosecutors would have exercised prosecutorial discretion. Instead, they arrested and separated thousands of families. And now the government is trying to bring those families back together. But we already know that scores of parents have been deported, and often these parents have been deported to really rural areas of places in Central America, and their kids were turned over to the government with little to no information as to who their parents were. And we're talking about very young children, toddlers, pre-verbal children. How you're going to reconnect a kid who doesn't know how to speak and whose parents speaks an indigenous Mayan language with their parents somewhere in rural Guatemala, it's going to be an enormous challenge.
So my final question, do you think it's going to get worse before it gets better, or have we seen the worst of it?
It's a very good question, because as it turns out, these family separations started well before the Trump administration issued the official order in May and April. There were test projects, sort of test cases of family separation in El Paso, Texas. Hundreds of separations in those early sort of experimentations. So we don't really know the scope of it at this point, and I think that it's going to be a long road ahead for these families.
All right, you got a lot of work ahead of you. Ryan Devereaux. Ryan, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.